Everyone. I'm Tulio Surgusa with Dojo Live. Today is Tuesday, May 19th, 2020, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Carlos Ponce in Mexico City and Kim Lantis from Hermosillo. Welcome, guys, to the show. And today we have our guest from, oh my gosh, what's the name
Boulder
of the company,
AI.
guys?
Boulder AI.
I'm looking at my notes. Okay, I have Bryan Terrell, who's the CTO. I'm sorry, I got it backwards again. I have Darren Odom, who's the CTO, and Bryan Terrell, who's the sales director. With what's the name of the company again, guys? What I don't have it listed over here on my sheet.
Boulder AI.
Odom AI. It's right
Yeah,
in front of me.
Boulder, like
Sorry,
Boulder,
guys.
Colorado.
I think
Boulder as in Boulder, Colorado.
I think quarantine is getting to my head, guys. I'm losing it. So welcome to the show. Let's start by introducing yourself. Darren, why don't we start with you? Please tell us a bit about you and your background and anything interesting that you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm an engineer, so my background is education from the Colorado School of Mines. Graduated with a bachelor's of science and studied computer science, electrical engineering, and then went immediately into satellite communication. Got my feet wet in IoT in the oil fields. So way before Internet of Things was a thing, we were doing satellite communication way out into the middle of West Texas. Then I got into device design, which included manufacturing and inspection with the medical device industry. Then I started my own consulting company, which was a 12-year effort of the School of Hard Knocks in terms of how to run a business, how to go get clients, how to be a salesman. I really learned a lot about how lots of different types of systems work. Got lucky, won a few multi-million-dollar government contracts, and those were largely focused on edge computing, which we'll talk a little bit about today. Edge computing in terms of cameras and how cameras and how robots see the world. That's really what got me into this industry.
Very cool. Thanks. Interesting background. When you say got my feet wet in the oil business, I started thinking jumping in a puddle of oil, but I'm sure that's not what it means. Bryan, please tell us about yourself.
Sure. Also, thanks for having us. And late 90s graduate of Texas A&M engineering technology. So I am technical. Started as a project manager in the automation side, HVAC side, with a nice, what we called a systems integrator back in the 90s. And still today, they're either systems integrators or security contractors. But through some happenings in the early 2000s, I hung my project management hat up and technical hat up and went into sales. So 20 years of successful selling in the automation space, in the access control, and then I really got into, in the early 2000s, quickly into cameras, DVRs, analog cameras, and such. But then jumped even quicker than that into IP cameras. I was named the IP guy at one of my companies early on in the early 2000s, because back in about 2003, I think I could name all the IP camera models by name for surveillance cameras. And took that into another company, another startup, that knowledge going in from an IP camera side to what then I jumped into the megapixel race with another company. I had much success selling very large end users, small to large, but any end user that needed video surveillance, high resolution, good clarity, made a lot of success, and then started building teams with my last company. And then the jump over to Boulder AI here recently, which I'm excited about because this is the next generation. This is the next step in technology and visual sensors. So that's my quick story.
Thanks, Bryan. Appreciate it. I totally understand the conversion over what I used to call over to the dark side. I started in a network operations center and on the technical side of the house, and eventually transition into account management and sales. So I
Big
get
jump.
that transition. It's a big jump, but you stay true to that consultant, that trusted advisor throughout your entire career, and that's, I think, what makes you good at sales. People make that jump. So welcome. Let's talk about Boulder AI. What gave birth to this idea? How did it come about? What are you solving? Tell us a little bit about the company.
Yeah, so I started this company about 3 years ago now. Actually, now that COVID-19 has put us all back in our houses and working remotely, I started this company here in this house, in the basement, and really just saw the need for a what's called edge computing brought into into the security industry. A lot of my consulting background is in machine vision and machine learning. In machine vision, especially in inspection, when you're looking at high-speed canning lines and things like that, it's not unusual, and it's been happening for a long time, that most of the computing is done inside of the camera because so much has to collaborate with the inspection process. And I really saw a need to bring that edge computing paradigm into this particular vertical. So who we are? So we are a privacy-focused visual, I'd say, Uber sensor. So we use AI, we use artificial intelligence that processes the video inside of the cameras themselves, using some supercomputers that are actually inside the camera. So that no video needs to leave the camera, only the metadata, and we'll talk about what that means. The cameras are more like IoT devices, more traditional IoT devices, or Internet of Things devices. So they're sending their metadata straight to the cloud directly, so that events are searchable and in real time. And the real thing that solves, the real problem that solves, is a lot of expensive infrastructure on-prem that currently exists. So right now, if you're going to run artificial intelligence on, many cameras, say you have a facility of hundreds or even thousands of cameras, the server infrastructure alone is absolutely massive. It's expensive. It's hard to maintain. So we're treating this more like an Internet of Things, an IoT device.
Great. Let's a lot more, see what kind of hurdles you guys are facing with that. But let's let Kim introduce the topic and kick off the conversation today.
Sure thing. I think that Darren did a nice job already of explaining what they wanted to talk about today. But the title of today's talk is Digital Twins, Data, Not Pictures, How Powerful AI-enabled cameras are providing digital replicas of the real world without compromising privacy. So I think this is very interesting. I love this data, not pictures, right? Because obviously most people, including myself, when we think of cameras, that's the first thing that comes to our mind. And we mostly think of cameras in terms of social interaction, something like we're doing today, or keeping track of our memories to share with others, or marketing, those types of elements. But obviously, as you've shared already, there's many verticals and many applications of cameras. So in your particular experience with AI and this, what you're explaining, what are the most useful verticals where this could be applied? You mentioned high-speed canning, and the only reason I even knew what you're talking about was that television show, right? Of like, what's it called? How It's Made or something? And the ones that spit out the bottles or the potato chips that are burnt and stuff like that, which is fascinating. But what are your verticals? What's the application for here? And particularly, why is privacy so important in those verticals?
Yeah, so we've actually taken our first steps into the smart city, which means that it's very, very visible from the public. And the last thing that we want to be is just another reason for the public to think, when they see a camera, Big Brother. Big Brother is watching. So we've taken a completely different spin on how that processes the data, and with BT and the other experience that we brought into the mix, we're moving from that smart city vertical into many, many different other verticals that also beg privacy, and frankly, edge computing in general. So
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, can you hear me fine? And he called me BT. We have another Bryan. Our CEO is Bryan. So everybody calls me BT if you hear him say BT. But we've recently put together a top cast of sales guys to really make a true coming out in 2020. So, and that's our job really, is to build the channel, build the team, and also find new verticals and explore new problem sets and such that end users want to drive. The traditional security space was almost, in the past, has always been more of the cameras by the pound per se. So if a customer says, hey, I need a surveillance system, I'll even take a step back and say what happened a lot of times with what customers would tell salesmen in the security industry and say, I need a security system. And what they meant was, what they're really saying is, I want a video surveillance. To me, security is not just about video surveillance. It's about, perimeter detection, saving lives, having the right location, using AI and analytics and such. So that's really been the transition. I think the traditional video surveillance market has run out of problems to solve with the technology they have, which is one of the reasons I jumped over to Boulder AI here recently. Is that now we've got a supercomputer, a camera, a visual sensor at the edge that actually is an open device that we can run different models in and solve different real world problems with either the video, but mostly the data, and do different things with that data to help that customer maybe turn that into a value offering or a return on return on investment, to really make something of maybe even their initial investment of video surveillance. We also have another product called a DNN node that Darren can get into, and utilize their existing infrastructure. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
So
Yeah, you mentioned real world problems. I'm very curious, could you share an example of a particular instance in which you helped solve a real world problem, what that was, and how the AI and data processing cameras were useful, without, of course, infringing on privacy?
I think Darren's got a ton of them. He's already solved.
I think we actually got the permission from the city of Denver to talk about this today. So we can talk specifically about how we're saving lives in the city of Denver right now using these cameras. There's been a massive increase in the number of pedestrian deaths between cars and people, specifically in a rapidly growing city. And Denver's not the only one. There's several that have this issue in conflicts between cars and people, and it doesn't always result in pedestrian death, but it can be life changing for a lot of folks that that have this happen. It's preventable, and the major challenge is knowing exactly when a pedestrian steps off the street, talking directly to the traffic controller and letting the traffic controller know that a pedestrian has stepped into the intersection without a false positive. So not doing that in error as little as possible. So we are 99.8% accurate in determining if a person has stepped into the intersection, and we do that within 10 milliseconds without transmitting a single picture outside of the camera itself. So that's
almost real time.
And what's the response then? Let's say, okay, the camera detects there's a person in the intersection. What happens? What happens next?
Yeah, so over a protocol called NTCIP, the camera communicates directly to the traffic controller, the thing that's actually controlling the lights, and it signals to either hold the light red while the pedestrian crosses, or it can actually turn the phases quicker in response. Right now, they're not actually extending any sort of green periods, but it actually can directly affect the phasing, the timing on the lights. And then there's also signage. So the signage, normally you have to press a button to say I'm going to cross the street. Well, a lot of times people just aren't in the state of mind to think to push the button. They'll just step out. The signs will actually flash automatically. So
Interesting. So I spent a couple of years, a few years back, as an advisor to an AI company that specifically focused in the smart city space, and discovered how incredibly fragmented that space is. What have been some of the hurdles you have faced in terms of getting your solution out to some of these smart city initiatives? Did you go directly, for example, with the city of Denver, or do you work with partners? What's worked for you, and how does that come to play for you?
that's an excellent question. It's definitely one of the harder customers to crack. But with Denver, we were fortunate enough to work directly with them. Our business model is actually a channel strategy, so we work with system integrators and channel partners to bring our solution to market. But with Denver in particular, there's just such a forward-looking city that they chose to work directly with us, and with that they get the benefit of hey, wouldn't it be cool if we enabled this functionality, and we were able to do that very quickly. But to your point of fragmentation, it's amazing how fragmented this particular vertical is. And that's
there's
really
there's no one go-to person. I mean, it is literally, I was blown away how much effort it requires to put together a smart city initiative, even a smart building initiative. And speaking of smart building, speaking of security, the meaning of security is obviously evolving and changing, right? Especially today with what's going on, security could also mean, detecting and sensing someone who might be coming into a building with a fever, for example. We've heard of examples where that technology is being used in other parts of the world to potentially detect the risks of COVID-19. Is that adding some new complexity, or are you seeing requirements for enhancing how cameras are used with additional sensors information in order to detect other risks that could be posed to the public?
Absolutely. Actually, outside of just the thermal case, there are quantifying social distancing. So knowing when large groups of people are gathering, and they haven't arrived on scene as maybe the family unit that is an exception to the rule. If a couple is walking down the street, you don't want to automatically alert on that situation. You want to know that is one of the exceptions to the rule. But if you get a large group of people that are coming together, then that's one of the things that we've seen. Although the city is still lacking a lot of people walking around, in the cities that we're in anyway.
And let me add to that too, as well as the logistics of that from a just from a point of entry and egress, with whether it's a certain type of sensor or a certain type of AI, just funneling people. It kind of comes back to an access control scenario too. So it's not just about the visual sensors and such, as also it is a lot of other unique situations that every customer is going to be different. So going to a utilizing a security integrator or somebody like that has the knowledge with that customer, that trusted advisor, to work through it. Not every customer is going to utilize the exact same solution, and it's not a one type fits all scenario.
So Bryan, you've seen the evolution of this space. You've been in this space for quite some time. I mean, would you say what's happened now with AI and embedded software solution inside of the devices, is that a major leapfrog event that's happened, or is that still pending, and what would that look like?
The evolution of security devices, I would say the IoT side of it with industrial devices is massive right now. Like I said, I think I said earlier, the megapixel race is somewhat over. So the clarity and such is there. Now it's what do we do with it? So the next evolution is understanding the power. And this is, again, the great thing about Boulder AI is we've stuffed as much computing processing power inside of a device and a visual sensor that we can do it with what's available today. And we're going to continue to do that month to month, year to year. So the next thing is, and it's exciting for me, especially myself, as building a channel out for us as I would say a secondary startup. Darren's already done the hard work, getting the technology to work and really provide some use cases and such over the last 3 years. Now the hard work's on us as the sales team to go out and relate to those end users and show them that we can actually solve problems. One of the things that Darren mentioned earlier, we was talking about falsing. That's another big transition, because the typical, when I say analytics, that's what other surveillance companies are running, is true, like just analytics. And most of the time it's on-prem servers and such that they're running the analytics on. And they're running rules and what have you, and they're doing a good job of it. But what if it's only 80%? So if the other 20% is falses, right? So then what happens to that security guard or somebody at a station or somebody watching it? And after a few falsing scenarios, they forget about it, right? So what we're able to do is more accurate data, more accurate true AI, deep neural networks at the edge, so that if we're 95, Darren's talking, and I know it's some of the rules that we have 99, 9.9%. That's massive. So when we trigger an event or you get that data, you look at it. I mean, you are responding to that data. And so now we attach that supercomputing power to a lot of different models and increase that accuracy. Now we're starting to solve end users' problems in a whole different manner, as well as is more accurate manner. So now with the value just skyrocketed right to them. And now they can go back to their board and their presidents and say, now we have a solution that works. Now we'll go ahead and spend a few more bucks here and there, or look at our budgets every year and spend a little bit more every year on something that's going to return, be a good return on investment.
I think you mentioned this idea. I'm sorry, my connectivity might be bad, but falsifying or false data and removing that. I think there's some beauty to kind of naturally remove any human bias from a machine as far as artificial intelligence goes, right? What a human might consider to be suspicious activity, a machine might clearly recognize as not suspicious, just because of the individual who might be involved. Is that something that you've taken into consideration or further applications there?
Yeah, actually, that's a major problem. And who really what we're doing was we're transferring, in a traditional machine learning problem, we're taking what humans have tagged and trained, and transferring that really to a neural network. The way that we are doing this is a much larger sample of people who are transferring that knowledge to a data set. So what we have is a platform, it's a cloud platform that allows you to see the video. It allows you as an individual to give your feedback, and then it weighs those feedbacks, in a network effect, so that it's not just one group of people that are helping train that AI. It's a much larger set, much larger diversity set than was ever possible before. But I guess back to the point that Tulio had brought before, talking about how fragmented this industry is, and in a lot of ways we're finding, even building automation, as you said, is fragmented. One of the reasons is because of data, and the common. So going back to really the title of the show, the digital twin. The reason and the definition of a digital twin is really simple. It's just the replica of an object or a person or entity that you can think of, or that the camera is seeing, and exposing that reality that in the way that the camera is interpreting it to an API. So it's just giving a common ground to anything that you want to connect to that. So we talk about fragmentation in markets and in particular verticals. I think that's a really powerful piece of this. It's all about the data. It's no longer about pictures or video, and that's really I just wanted to communicate that.
It sounds a little similar to what the ad tech space has done with perpetually connected consumer data, where they create those pixels, if you will, of individuals and such. But I was curious to learn a little bit more about what are some of the key channels for you? These are, you said, systems integrators and also companies that are tackling that smart city marketplace. Are you seeing more demand in the U.S. versus in other countries? Where's the market going with this? Where are the investments happening?
I think that's probably a two-part question. The traditional security channel in the surveillance market, I'm going to say abruptly that some of them have just left themselves behind over the past few years, and so you've got some of the regionals, call them super regionals and nationals across North America, and others that play in the same type of size across the globe. Sometimes your smaller guys, your regionals or super regionals, can actually move and shake a little bit faster with their technical expertise and actually pull in some of the newer technologies and wrap their heads around it. It also comes back down to the sales force that they have and their technical ability of the sales force to wrap their arms around certain technologies and new technologies. What was interesting to me, though, the other piece of the puzzle was that whether it's the traffic space or industrial space, there are little niche types of integrators out there that are more in the IoT space and have been for many years, whether they knew it or not. So for me to build a channel is I'm looking at 2 or 3 different areas to bring on those types of integrators and contractors, and sometimes even they act as distributors, even though we're not necessarily approaching that model. That kind of gets messy with a product like ours. But the guys that really are well connected, I say guys and gals, you know what I'm saying, but there are people out there that are very well connected in a bunch of different types of markets. So that's really what I'm looking at. Specifically, we're not trying to blow this up and light everybody up, but at the same time, the people that are out there that have the technical expertise to install, to sell, and actually, really, it's more of the selling piece of it, because we're such, and I want to say carefully, a unique experience. Is this from a typical sales person out there that is just trying to sell a bunch of cameras to a customer, which there's a bunch of them out there that are doing that. Now we're trying to get into solving problems more accurately and carefully, and then building that trust, like you said before, which is what your true professional salespeople are doing. So that's, and then I'll hit off into the global. Our VP of Global Sales is working that channel. Of course, that's a little bit more difficult to do due to time constraints and travel constraints, but we're growing that as well as we speak. And we're also, on a side note, we're working with a lot of OEMs that are actually interested in our hardware. So that's another piece of the puzzle that is unique to us versus somebody or some of the big players in the surveillance industry that aren't getting those calls. So we field those regularly.
So when it comes to data and this problem solving for your customers, which comes first, this chicken and the egg dynamic? I have this tool that can help solve a problem. What's the problem? Or I have this problem. How can your tool help? Like, do you modify your tools to help, or do you fit your tools into problems? And I don't know if I'm making sense of my question.
Oh, it's almost always problem first. We don't try and say that we have a tool where the problems lie. Almost always, the customer comes to us with a particular problem set.
Now, yeah, I'll jump off that too for just 2 seconds and say, as good sales professionals, that we're going to try to also identify problems that customers, they may have put on the back burner. They may not even, they may have a problem, but they don't know there's a sensor out there that can fix it, right? So it really changes the game from just general, again, surveillance and recording and just recording video to let's take a deep dive and let's think of the art of the possible here. In that sales, maybe that sales pitch, instead of it being so long, maybe it's only 10 minutes, and really brainstorming for the last 20, 30 minutes to an hour or so.
So guys, we're up on time, but I do want to ask one final question, and it specifically, you know, in the short few years that I spent in smart cities, one thing I learned is you have to be incredibly adaptable to make it in that space. And a lot of companies don't have that kind of flexibility, which is why they give up on that space. That's at least what I've learned, and I'm not an expert in that space at all, but I certainly would love to hear what your experience has been like. What's the journey been like for you in terms of learning to be adaptable, adapting with the markets as they're, because it's a market that's still being defined, right? So what's that journey been like for you, and how do you keep yourself sane in that process?
Yeah, that's an amazing point, because I've lived that over the last 3 years. So one thing is the technology. So a lot of the competing, you know, camera technology, even if it's an AI camera, is based on an ASIC, which is an application-specific processor that does one thing and does it really well. We've chosen to use more general processors, which means that we can stay ahead of the curve in terms of the research. AI is changing so rapidly that you know, every single week there's new techniques, there's new layers, there's new types of neural network layers that keep adding to this this equation of standing on the shoulders of giants. So staying ahead of the research, and then from a customer perspective, we can because we're a small company, we can turn on a dime. And that's what's given us an edge in this marketplace for sure.
That might answer why the space is so segmented. You have to be able to be flexible and quick, right? It's been a pleasure having you guys. We certainly would like to have you back at some point and hear some stories about use cases. Definitely want to share those with the audience. Thanks for joining us. It's a wrap. Carlos, what do we got tomorrow? We got another show tomorrow, correct? This is the moment where we try to read his lips. Go ahead.
I deeply apologize. I was always on mute. So, yeah, tomorrow we're going to be speaking with Dave Jevons, the CEO of CipherTrace, and we're going to be speaking about. Let's see. I got the topic right here. We're going to be speaking about, where is it? I lost it. I'm sorry. I apologize. Closed the window accidentally. So, okay, but just bear with me. Anyway, the company is going to be CipherTrace. It's going to be about cybersecurity and cryptocurrencies. So that's what we're going to be speaking tomorrow right here on Dojo Live at 1 p.m. Pacific with Dave Jevons from CipherTrace right here on Dojo Live.
Might be a company you guys ought to be talking to each other about.
Maybe so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks for having Boulder AI. Thank you.